phone rang in the middle of a Tuesday that I thought I understood. It was his phone, not mine, and the name on the screen was a number saved as some clinic. I remember the way he went still, the way his eyes slid sideways as if the sound itself had shame. He answered, and a voice told him that his wife had been in a car accident. I watched his posture fold and then reassemble into purpose. I remember the exact thought that tore through me like a paper cut you only feel a moment later. His wife. I am his wife. I'm 28 years old, and I was standing 6 feet away, holding a mug with a chip in the rim, thinking about laundry and lemon dish soap and the tiny domestic messes that glue a day together. I didn't say anything. I just listened as my husband promised he was on his way, grabbed his keys, and left a dent in the rug where his heel pushed off. Shock is not cinematic. There is no zoom, no dramatic gust of wind. Shock is an inventory. You look at the mug and it is still chipped. You look at your hand and it is still yours. The kitchen smells like citrus and coffee, and your skin is a little sticky because you didn't rinse well. The dog is still breathing in the ridiculous snow that made you laugh last night. And in the center of all that ordinary, a new word is trying to live: wife. I counted the years, the holidays, the dentist appointments, the furniture bought in installments, the emails with subject lines like reminder, rent due. I thought of the ring he put on my finger and the receipt for the brunch after. I thought about the trips, the gifts, the way he would return from places like Phoenix and Portland and Dallas with silk-smooth apologies wrapped in those expensive boxes that made me feel seen and purchased at the same time. A new necklace. A new bag. A new perfume. Little trophies to put on a shelf and dust. He traveled for work. That was the deal from day one. Even when we were 24 and holding our breath at the grocery store, he was already the guy with a suitcase by the door. He had a career that lived on airplanes and in hotel lobbies under bad lighting. The promotions came with miles, and the miles came with gifts. I told my mother that love sometimes wears a blazer and smells like a rental car. She told me to make sure I had my own savings. I made a joke about how romance and spreadsheets could hold hands. I built a life like a budget, line items for rent, food, flowers, forgiveness. The forgiveness part got expensive. Little absences add up. At first it was just the trips. Then it was trips that extended by a day. Then it was dinners he swore he forgot to mention. Then it was the sense that I knew his schedule less than the airline app did. The gifts got nicer as the silences got longer. I learned the color of apology in tissue paper. I learned the weight of it in my palm. People who say money can't buy love have never held it out against a washed face and watched the second-hand win. Or maybe they have better discipline than I do. Maybe I love the performance of our life more than the truth of it. I can admit that now. I can admit I let the shine blur the edges. I should define what I mean by toxic, because I've learned that word can become a costume people wear to look like they've done their work. Toxic was the way I measured the temperature of the room by his mood. Toxic was the pause in my chest when he chose me for a weekend over his meetings. Toxic was telling myself I was independent and capable while building a calendar around his arrivals. Toxic was how a gift could wipe a fight clean, like a damp cloth across the counter, leaving a faint smell of chemicals and the illusion of fresh. The day of the phone call, I didn't cry. I put my mug down and noticed a new scratch on the countertop. I entered the dishwasher and left the top rack open. I gave the dog fresh water. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and tried to remember the last time I knew everything about his day. It felt like trying to remember a dream as it dissolves. Every time I reached for what was solid, it misted away. I stared at our closet, and all the suits lined up like obedient men in a choir. The accident should have been the center. Any normal person would have made it the center. But I wasn't normal that day. I was an investigator who did not yet know a subject, who only knew the outline of a betrayal shaped like a sentence spoken by a stranger on a phone. I told myself that medical staff make mistakes, that people misspeak, that wife can be a word used loosely by a stress caller. I told myself these things because the alternative was to stand up, walk to the mirror, and say out loud that the life I curated like a mood board had a missing piece that was not a color or a fabric but a human being. He came home late that night with a story about paperwork and waiting rooms and the kind of tie that sits between your eyes. He did not offer details, and I did not ask. I have replayed that choice so many times it has grooves. Not asking was a decision. I dressed it up as compassion. I told myself I was being generous. But generosity that avoids clarity is not kindness. It is strategy. I think I was afraid that asking would make the answer real, and as long as it lived in a fog, I could live too. Days went by. He left again for a short trip that got longer. He returned with the bracelet I had bookmarked months ago, the one I never told him about. He said it made him think of me. I thought of browser cookies and targeted ads and how algorithms now do what intimacy used to. I let him clasp it around my wrist. I let him kiss my forehead. I let the lie, if it was a lie, tuck itself in next to me and borrow my pillow. I don't know what made me check the GPS in his car. That's what people will ask in the comments if this ever becomes a video that strangers judge and consume. They will ask about my moment of trespass, the one that will make some of them decide I deserved everything I got. I'm not going to defend it. I opened the car app on my phone because the car was technically shared, and because I was curious, and because I had been building a private courtroom in my brain where curiosity is evident and the verdict is just a feeling that refuses to sit down. The app showed me his recent destinations, that little list the navigation system keeps like a diary that doesn't mind being read. I expected airports and office parks. I saw an address I didn't recognize in a neighborhood I didn't belong to, a place with streets named after trees even though the trees were young and the houses new enough to smell like paint. I drove there on a Sunday afternoon after telling a friend I couldn't meet for coffee because I wasn't feeling well. I was feeling laser focused in a way that has nothing to do with wellness. I parked 2 blocks away and walked like I belonged to the day. The building was modern and undecorated, like it had been designed by someone who loved rectangles. The lobby had a bowl of green apples for no reason. The elevator played a song I couldn't place. I didn't know what I would do when the doors opened. That is the truth. I was a bullet with no target. I was a question with too many answers. I found the door by matching the number in the GPS history to the number stenciled in a clean font on the wall. I knew his knock. I didn't use it. I didn't knock at all. I listened and decided that silence would reveal more than noise. People who lie do not like silence. It grows facts. I waited. A key turned. The door opened because the woman inside was expecting him, not me. What I saw will never be theatrical enough for a movie and always too vivid for sleep. It was not the tableau person anyone imagines when imagining what they would do in my place. It was simplicity. He was there in a t-shirt I hated, holding a bottle of seltzer because he never drinks still water if he can help it. She was there in a sweater with a frayed sleeve and eyes that knew exactly who I was. It wasn't their closeness that undid me. It was their ease. That ease said everything. If you want the part where I turned the place upside down, I don't have it. If you want a scream, a slap, a thrown glass, pick another narrator. My body did something worse. It behaved. My voice sounded civilized, like a receptionist in a slow office. I stated my name and my relationship to him. I watched his pupils widen and then shrink like the whole world had been put through a lens. I said I needed the truth. The truth arrived dressed as a sister. The woman said she was family. She said she was sick and he had been helping. She said he was ashamed of not telling me because he didn't want to burden me. She said all the classic lines, but she didn't say them like lines. She said them like a confession rehearsed until it passed as authentic, which is the saddest kind of talent. He stood there nodding, and it wasn't theatrical, it was human. He looked like a person begging me with his eyebrows to accept a story that would let 3 people keep breathing. I left. I left with the sound in my ears like wind through a door that doesn't close right. I left with the memory of her sweater and his seltzer and the way the apartment smelled faintly of eucalyptus. I left carrying the weight of the word sister, even though my arms were empty. I got in the car and turned off the radio and drove home on surface streets because the highway felt too honest. I spent the evening folding laundry into small perfect squares like order could be engineered if the corners aligned. When he came home later, he touched my shoulder and I let him. He whispered an apology I pretended was for being a poor communicator, and not for constructing a life that allowed him to receive a phone call about a wife while I stirred sugar into coffee 6 feet away. If you are furious with me already, that is fair. I am furious with me too, in retrospect. But in the middle of a lie, you do not see geometry, you see fog. You choose the path where you can still stand upright. I told myself I had to be kind if she was sick. I told myself love asks for patience. I told myself marriages bend. I told myself privacy for others can look like betrayal to you. I told myself so many things that felt noble in my mouth and cowardly in my bones. Time did what time always does. It kept going. He traveled more. He brought back more apologies you could wear. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a pharmacy near that same address and told myself he was picking up medication for a sister too tired to leave bed. I looked at his calendar, which he had synced to mine years ago, and then slowly stopped updating as if transparency was a novelty that had gone out of style. I tried to picture his childhood and invent a sister into it. I imagined family photographs I'd somehow missed. I constructed a family tree that included a branch no one had mentioned. I made her sick in my mind so that my compassion could have a place to sit. I would like to tell you that the truth arrived cleanly. It didn't. It arrived in fragments that cut. A bank alert for a large transfer I didn't recognize. An insurance explanation of benefits addressed to him that listed a procedure for a spouse whose name was not mine. A line on his pay stub showing a change in dependent coverage. I told myself clerical errors happen. I told myself the world is messy. I told myself it would be unkind to embarrass him by asking, as if embarrassment exceeds betrayal on the scale of things to avoid. I overheard him in the bathroom one night using a voice too gentle for a sister he didn't grow up with. I stood in the hallway counting the holes in the acoustic ceiling like tally marks for every time I had chosen piece of a truth. The doctor called again, weeks later. It was a follow-up about imaging, the kind of call that sounds like it should be made to someone in charge. He wasn't home, and his phone was on the counter because he had left it charging next to the cutting board. The screen lit up with the same clinic name, and I stared at the words until they went blurry. I didn't answer. I let it ring out, then I called back from my phone and gave them his full name and mine and said I was returning a missed call. The nurse spoke like a person dealing with paperwork and people who forget to bring it. She thanked me for calling and said she wanted to confirm that the spouse on file would be present for the next appointment because consent forms needed updating. She said the spouse's name. It wasn't mine. It was the woman in the sweater. There is no sound to describe the way a world hollows. The dog barked twice in the living room and I sat down on the kitchen floor in front of the cabinet with the mixing bowls. I held the phone and nodded, which is a useless gesture over a line. I wrote down the appointment time, which is a useless piece of information. I said thank you. I was raised to say thank you. I was raised to make other people comfortable. I hung up and put my forehead against the cabinet door and felt the cold of paint under my skin. Then I stood up and pulled our lease from the file drawer and read our names and read our signatures and tried to swallow the vision of another lease somewhere else with a different set of letters in ink. I went back to that address on a weekday morning dressed like a person who belonged to a life that included yoga. I brought flowers. It was a test I told myself I was not administering. I knocked and an older neighbor opened her door across the hall and smiled because she recognized me now. That was a new kind of wound. Recognize me now. As if I were a character in a play with limited scenes. She asked if my husband had found his wallet. My stomach fell in a way that felt like physics. She said he'd knocked last week because he thought he dropped it in the elevator. She winked. She said it's good to see a couple so in love. She said some people are just meant to be. She gestured toward the door where I had been the woman with the wrong lock. I thanked her. I am so polite inside disasters. Inside, the apartment had more oven than ours did. There was a jacket of his I had never seen. A book he swore he hated sat on a table with a bookmark halfway through. There were 2 toothbrushes, not his travel kit but a second home kit. There was a framed photo of them with faces too close to be siblings and hands touching in a way that defines its own language. I stood there while she told me again that she was his sister and that she was sick and that he had kept it secret to protect me. She did not stutter. She looked straight at me with eyes that had practiced. She said she would never come between family. She said this was what it looked like. She said I had to trust him. I left the flowers on the counter because I could not hold them and my life at the same time. I walked down the hall, then pressed the elevator button and felt the petty urge to let the doors close on a woman who was walking toward me. The doors opened anyway because the building was new and the senses were efficient and there would be no small acts of cruelty to make me feel strong. I got into my car and screamed without sound. My mouth made the shape and air came, but the scream stayed inside where it could do the most damage. Here is the thing that will split people. I didn't leave. Not then. Part of me wanted to stay and win a game I didn't agree to play. Part of me wanted to make him pick one life and then punish him with forgiveness forever. Part of me wanted every expensive gift for every unopened truth. Part of me wanted to prove I was more wife than whatever she was. Part of me wanted to set the whole thing on fire and roast marshmallows over the blaze. If you've never been in the middle of a story like this, you will think you know which part should win. If you have, you know it depends on the date and the song on the radio and whether you ate breakfast. I played a role for a while too. I played the role of the understanding partner who believes in family obligations and illnesses that put men on planes. I played the role of the woman who receives a bracelet and calls it love out loud and a bruise in private. I played the role of someone who sleeps next to a man and pretends not to hear the beeps of a second phone he keeps on silent. I got very good at rituals. Tea before bed. A walk at lunch. Lists in the fridge with magnets shaped like fruit. Stability is theatre. The truth finished arriving on a morning like any other. He was showering, steam curled under the door. His tablet lit up on the nightstand with a calendar reminder that should have been innocuous. It was an anniversary. Not ours. Not even the date of the first night he took me to the hole in the wall pasta place and told me Rome was overrated, which is something no one who has been to Rome says. It was the date of a lease start for the apartment with the green apples downstairs, the one the neighbour said he'd lived in for a while. The event title included 2 initials and the word home with a heart emoji, which is the sort of detail an algorithm can't invent. The shared calendar was titled Family. Not ours. The invite had been sent from an email account I'd never seen and accepted by 2 people with one last name. Not mine. I took screenshots like a person collecting seashells before it died. I emailed them to myself and then to an account he didn't know I had. I put them in a folder named with a word I'd never put next to his name before, evidence. I don't know why I gathered proof. There is a superstition that says if you build a case, the jury will assemble. My jury was a future version of me who would need courage. I forced courage into the present. When he came out of the shower, I told him I knew. I didn't shout. I didn't whisper. I put every expensive gift in a row on the dresser like trophies of a sport that suddenly embarrassed me. I told him about the cult, about the spouse designation, about the neighbor who thought I belonged to another life. I told him about the calendar and the initials and the word home that I couldn't unsee. I told him I had looked in drawers I had promised myself I would never open and found a stack of mail rubber banded together with her name and his name linked by words like policy and beneficiary. I told him the part that should have been obvious weeks ago. She wasn't his sister. She was his choice. I was his choice too, but only when he was looking. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He did something worse. He reached for me with the same hands that had reached for her and asked me to be gentle. There is a version of this story where I leave right then. I didn't. I stood in our bedroom and negotiated terms of departure like a lawyer who forgot to take the bar. I asked for time to find a new place. I asked for money he offered so easily it made me nauseous. I asked for him to tell his mother himself because I refused to be the villain in a narrative where he still guessed to be the golden child. I asked for the dog to stay with me because the dog didn't lie. I asked for him to attend therapy so he could learn to use the word want without hiding it under the word help. I asked for the respect of privacy, and then I put our story on the internet anyway, in a way that protects names but not choices, because silence had turned me into a shadow. A week later, the other woman messaged me from an account it had posted nothing and followed no one. She confessed without saying sorry. She explained without asking for understanding. She told me she was never sick. She told me she played the role because he asked her to and because pity oils the hinges on doors that should be closed. She told me she thought I knew and didn't care as long as the gifts kept coming. She told me the accident had been real, which almost made it worse, because it meant the universe had thrown a brick at our house and we had shrugged. She told me she loved him. She told me she thought he loved her. She told me a detail that lodged under my skin and stayed. When the nurse asked for the spouse's name and he said hers, he did not look upset. He looked relieved. I have been accused of staying for the money. I have been accused of being naive and of being complicit and of being a martyr in a religion that worships denial. I have been called brave too, which is not a word I claim. What I was and sometimes still am is human. Humans calibrate. We make peace treaties with our own loneliness. We trade a piece of truth for a piece of calm and call it maturity. I am not proud of it, but I understand it. The bracelet is still in a drawer because I cannot wear it and cannot throw it away. It is a museum exhibit I visit when I feel like punishing myself. The label reads, Donation from the Department of Fiction. I moved out 2 months after the morning of the calendar reminder. I told him I would not ruin him publicly, and then I realized he had ruined himself privately, and that was somehow worse. I blocked his second phone and then his first. I kept the dog and the lease and the chipmunk because I needed evidence that I had survived my own kindness. I told my mother, who sighed like a person who has seen this movie and hated the ending every time. I told 2 friends who already knew because they have eyes. I told a therapist who did not flinch when I said I missed him. I told myself in the mirror that love without respect is just attention and that I had trained myself to crave attention the way some people crave sugar. This is the part where a neat lesson should arrive. It doesn't. What I have is a box of paperwork with 2 names that will never again share a doorbell. What I have is the memory of a Tuesday when a will told me, in a voice made of fluorescent lights and bad coffee, that my husband's wife had been in an accident. What I have is the nauseating clarity that I could have stayed and built a life on top of a hole and that it would have held for a frighteningly long time. What I have is rage that surprises me while I am grocery shopping. What I have is tenderness for the version of me that believed a sister could be invented for the sake of my peace. What I have is a desire to warn every woman who prides herself on her independence that self-sufficiency can become the story you tell yourself to justify starving. People will ask if I hate him. Sometimes. Mostly I hate the way I disappeared by degrees. I hate the way I rehearsed compassion so thoroughly that it became a cover and not a gift. I hate the way money can apologize so loudly that you forget what question you asked. I hate how easy it was to mistake a well-run life for an honest one. I hate that when I think of the accident, I see a car I never drove and a hospital room I never entered and forms I never signed, and yet the weight of it lives in my chest as if I was there. There is one thing I am grateful for, and it is ugly. I am grateful for the precision of the betrayal. There is a kind of kindness in certainty. When the nurse said spouse and used her name, the door closed that had been left ajar for too long. I stopped having to squint. I stopped blaming my eyes. The final reveal didn't make me stronger, it made me honest. There is a line between forgiveness and surrender, and I had been straddling it for so long my legs shook. I stepped back onto my side. If you are the version of me who is still in the apartment with the green apples downstairs, who is still receiving gifts and calling them proof, who is still arranging clean corners and calling it safety, I am not going to tell you to leave. I am going to tell you to collect your own evidence. Not the screenshots. Evidence of yourself. Evidence that your voice is loud enough to hear over the tissue paper. Evidence that you know the shape of your own loneliness and can name it without shame. Evidence that you can love without merging, that you can forgive without erasing yourself, that you can choose your own name when someone else offers you a role you never auditioned for. I don't know how his other story ends. Maybe he marries her in every way that counts. Maybe he finds a new word that fits. Maybe he stumbles into a truth he can live with. Maybe he buys her another bracelet and calls it starting over. Those are not my endings to write. My ending is a rented studio with plants that are still alive and a calendar that only pings my name. My ending is the first morning I woke up and realized no one was traveling and no one was lying and no one was calling to tell anyone that a wife was in an accident. My ending is a chipmunk that still spills a little on the rim and a dog that snores and I can't it up with a scratch and a woman who knows that love and gifts are different languages and is learning which one she speaks. If you want a moral, choose one and write it in the comments. Tell me I should have left sooner. Tell me I should have stayed and fought. Tell me I deserved it. Tell me I was brave. I have finally learned that other people's verdicts do not make a sentence I have to serve. Here is my final provocation, the thing that will divide the room. I do not regret loving him. I regret every time I love myself less in order to keep loving him in the way he required. If that makes me foolish, fine. If it makes me human, that is also fine. If it makes you uncomfortable, sit with that longer than you sit with my jewelry drawer. And if you ever hear a voice on a phone call naming a wife who isn't you, may you choose the truth quickly. Not because you are heroic. Because you are the only person who has to live inside you when the gifts stop being shiny and the silence starts telling the truth.